Okay, so you want to dive into WHY Kamala Harris lost the election?
Mhm.
We dug into some recent political analysis, and the results are fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's November 6, 2024. The results are in, and Trump is back in the White House.
Right.
And what we're trying to figure out today is, like, what does the electoral map tell us about this outcome, right?
Well, it's interesting. The 2024 map actually looks a lot more like the 2016 map than the 2020 map.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like we're kind of seeing a resurgence of that same voter base that propelled Trump to victory the first time around.
So not just demographics switching sides, but like a whole segment of voters that were maybe laying low in 2020, and now they're back.
Exactly. And you see it in some of the unexpected flips.
Yeah.
Georgia, Arizona, Nevada,
Wow.
states that Democrats thought they had secured, those all went back to red this time around.
That's wild. A lot of people were talking about those Rust Belt states being crucial for a Democrat victory.
Right.
What happened to the so-called blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin?
Yeah, the blue wall definitely crumbled this time around. Those states, which were absolutely vital for Democrats in the past, they all went red this year. And one of the things that really jumps out in the analysis is that Harris seems to have underperformed with rural black voters,
Okay.
particularly compared to Biden's performance in 2020. We're talking about regions like Southern Virginia, Eastern North Carolina, South Georgia, places with significant black populations in rural areas.
So even within a demographic group that has historically leaned Democrat, there were shifts away from Harris.
Absolutely.
That's got to be a wake-up call for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, Trump saw increased support in rural areas and those suburbs further out from city centers, what some call exurbs.
Right.
He even gained ground in counties that border traditional Democratic strongholds.
So it's a more nuanced picture emerging here, right?
Right.
It's not as simple as urban versus rural,
Yeah.
or one demographic block versus another. There are multiple layers to this story, with shifts happening within groups as well as between them.
Yeah, you're spot on. And to really unpack this, we need to zoom in on some specific states that illustrate these trends on a smaller scale.
Okay.
So let's take Virginia as a prime example.
Okay.
It was a much closer race there than anyone anticipated, and it reveals a pattern that we see repeated across the nation.
Okay, I'm curious about this Virginia situation. What happened there that made it such a nail-biter?
Well, Northern Virginia, with its large suburban population, is typically a Democratic stronghold. And while Harris did win those areas, she didn't secure the overwhelming margins that Biden enjoyed in 2020. The gap was much smaller this time.
Interesting. So even in areas that were considered Maggie killing fields, the expected landslide for Harris just didn't happen.
Right.
I'm also thinking about Florida. That was a big win for Trump, wasn't it?
Florida is a key state in this election, and no one realistically expected Harris to win it. But what surprised many was the margin of Trump's victory, a whopping 13 points.
Wow.
Which translates to 1.4 million votes.
Wow, that's a serious blow. What factors contributed to such a massive win for Trump in Florida? Was it specific policies, demographic shifts, something else entirely?
There were several factors at play, but one that jumps out is the unexpected flip of Pinellas and Duval counties.
Okay.
These counties went for Biden in 2020, but this time they swung back to Trump. This could signal a broader dissatisfaction with the current administration among certain voter groups.
So we're seeing this trend of shifts in traditional voting patterns. And it's not just limited to one or two states. It seems like there's a bigger story unfolding.
Right.
Is there anything else from Florida that might shed some light on this?
Well, Florida also offers a glimpse into a potentially seismic shift in the Latino vote.
Okay.
And this isn't just a Florida story. It has national implications.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The Latino vote has been the subject of so much discussion and debate leading up to this election. What insights did this election provide?
Well, one of the most surprising observations is that Trump saw a much stronger swing towards him among Latino voters than anticipated, particularly in Florida.
Yeah.
Take, for example, counties with substantial Puerto Rican populations like Orange and Osceola.
Okay.
Harris lagged significantly behind Biden's 2020 margins in these areas.
That's surprising. These are voters who might have been expected to be turned off by certain controversies surrounding Trump. What do you make of that?
It's certainly unexpected. In
Yeah.
fact, Trump actually won Osceola County, which suggests that the factors driving this shift in Latino voting patterns go beyond those specific controversies.
So we're potentially looking at a realignment here, not just a minor shift. This raises the question, what about other areas with significant Latino populations? Did they show similar trends?
The trend definitely seems to hold. Look at Miami-Dade County with its large Cuban-American population.
Right.
In 2016, Clinton won it by a landslide, 66% to 34%.
Wow.
This year, Trump flipped the county, winning by 10 points.
That's a dramatic turnaround. So it seems this shift in the Latino vote wasn't just confined to Florida.
Exactly. It appears to be part of a broader trend. We witness similar patterns in other states with large Latino populations like Texas.
Hmm.
Even counties that have traditionally leaned Democrat saw a significant swing towards Trump.
This is really fascinating stuff. So it seems the 2024 election wasn't just about specific policies or candidates, but also about a deeper shift in the electorate, particularly among Latino voters.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Wow.
And this raises some really crucial questions for the Democratic Party moving forward. Stepping back from individual states and demographics for a second, this election really challenges some of those traditional assumptions about voting blocs and regional strongholds.
Yeah. It feels like we're seeing a lot of those old rules kind of breaking down, doesn't it?
It does, and it's got a lot of people wondering if maybe the parties are out of touch with the voters they've traditionally relied on.
Right, right. Like, are they really speaking to what voters actually care about?
Exactly, and that brings us back to something we discussed earlier, Harris underperforming with those rural black voters.
Yeah.
A lot of the analysis suggests that it might be tied to specific policy decisions or maybe the way those policies were communicated.
So are you saying that some of these voters just felt like their concerns weren't being taken seriously enough?
That's definitely one interpretation. It's possible that the message just didn't resonate with them the way it did in the past.
Interesting. So it's not just about demographics, but also about how effectively the parties are communicating their message to different segments of the population.
Exactly. And there's a lot of discussion about whether the Democrats in particular have lost touch with the needs of working class voters.
And not just in rural areas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing this in cities too.
Absolutely. And this election definitely seems to support that idea.
You mentioned earlier that dissatisfaction with the current administration played a role in the election outcome. What were some of the specific things that voters were unhappy about?
Well, economic concerns seem to have been a major factor.
Okay.
A lot of voters felt like the economic recovery hadn't reached them. They're dealing with rising costs of living, wages haven't really kept up, things like that.
So even though the overall economy might look good on paper, there's a sense that those gains aren't being felt equally by everyone.
Exactly. And that can create a real sense of frustration and insecurity, which can lead people to look for change.
Right. They're looking for someone who understands their struggles.
Precisely. And this seems to have played out differently in various demographic groups, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing a kind of fragmentation of the electorate, right?
Definitely.
It makes me think back to our discussion about the shift in the Latino vote. Were there specific economic policies that resonated with those voters, pushing them towards Trump?
It's a complex issue, but some analysts suggest that Trump's messaging around jobs and economic opportunity might have appealed to some segments of the Latino population, particularly working-class voters and small business owners.
So even within the Latino community, there are diverse economic interests and priorities.
Absolutely, and I think this election highlights the danger of relying on broad demographic categories to understand voter behavior.
It's like those categories can mask a lot of internal diversity in terms of economic situation, social values, and political beliefs.
Exactly.
Going back to our discussion about Florida, those counties with large Puerto Rican populations that flipped to Trump really stand out. What might have driven that shift, apart from the economic factors?
Well, some analysts point to cultural issues, things like family values, religious beliefs, and attitudes towards social change.
Interesting. So are you saying that some Latino voters felt like the Democratic Party was too focused on progressive social issues?
That's one interpretation. Some voters might have felt like their own values weren't being represented or respected.
So it wasn't just about the economy. It was also about how people saw themselves fitting into the broader cultural landscape.
Exactly, and it seems like the Republican Party might have done a better job of tapping into those anxieties and concerns.
Yeah, it's almost like they were speaking a different language, a language that resonated with those voters on a deeper level.
It's possible. It just goes to show how complex voter motivations can be. It's rarely just one issue. It's a whole combination of factors.
Absolutely. Economic concerns, cultural values, perceptions of the candidates and parties, it all plays a role.
Right, and this election has really exposed the limitations of using simple labels and categories to describe voters.
It's a good reminder that voters are individuals, each with their own unique set of experiences and beliefs.
And that understanding those nuances is absolutely crucial if you want to engage with them effectively.
This election has been a real wake-up call, hasn't it? It's like a giant reset button for both parties.
It has. And now both sides have a chance to reflect, reassess, and maybe even chart a new course for the future.
This has been really eye-opening. I mean, this election feels like a real turning point, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a fair assessment. It's brought a lot of those underlying tensions and trends to the surface.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like the old playbook just doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't.
So where do we go from here? What are the big takeaways?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that the electorate is way more fluid and dynamic than we often give it credit for.
Mm.
We can't rely on those old assumptions about voting blocks and regional patterns. They're just not as reliable as they used to be.
It's like everything's up for grabs now, right?
It is, and that's going to require some serious adjustments from both parties if they want to stay relevant.
So what kind of adjustments are we talking about? What needs to change?
I think the biggest challenge, particularly for the Democrats, is going to be figuring out how to bridge those divides that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
The urban-rural divide, the economic divide, the cultural divide. They need to find a way to connect with a broader range of voters to build coalitions that can bridge those differences.
So it's not just about tweaking policies or coming up with a better slogan. It's about something much deeper than that.
It is. It's about a fundamental shift in how they approach politics, how they engage with voters.
So getting back to the basics, really listening to what people are saying, understanding their concerns.
Absolutely. Moving beyond those demographic labels and recognizing the complexity within those groups.
In this election, it's really given us a lot to think about. What are the questions we should be asking ourselves as we move forward, both individually and as a society?
I think the most important question is, how do we want to shape the future of American democracy? What kind of society are we trying to build? And how can we work together across those differences to achieve that vision?
It's a tall order for sure.
It is. But this election, while it's exposed some deep divisions, it's also a reminder that ultimately we're all in this together.
That's a really powerful message. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I think we all learned a lot.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, this is really just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
It's up to all of us to keep digging deeper, to explore these issues from multiple perspectives, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue with others.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about here at The Deep Dive. So keep those questions coming, listeners. We want to hear from you. What are your takeaways? What resonated with you?
And most importantly, what do you think the future holds for American politics?
Until next time, stay curious, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.